failure is not an option. It's just simply not an option. And that's, sounds funny. It was like self-hypnosis, but it was like, you just got to keep going. There really isn't another choice. Like, what else are you supposed to do?
This is Funded, a show where founders who raised millions in venture capital share the gritty side of what it actually took to get that money in the bank. I'm Jason Ye. Not too long ago, I was trying to get my ideas funded. And back in the day, I was a VC listening to founders pitch me for money. The hardest part of raising money isn't just telling investors that your business is worth backing. The hardest part is actually staying alive long enough to convince them. Fundraising, especially for deep tech companies and other capital-intensive businesses, have a really hard time doing this because for them, it isn't just about pitching, it's about enduring. Sometimes it's about hearing no more times than you can count, running on fumes, and somehow finding a way to keep going. When it comes to raising capital, founders who make it through don't always have the best decks or the strongest networks, but those that do make it through have one thing in common: they don't quit. That's exactly the kind of resilience Sheng brought to building Aquaria. Brian bootstrapped his business with millions of his own dollars when investors wouldn't bite. He pivoted, experimented, and ran countless product-market fit sprints over the course of 2 years. He faced rejection after rejection, almost ran out of money multiple times, and still, he kept pushing. And good thing he did, because Aquaria recently closed a $112 million round to scale its solution for generating clean water out of thin air. But before we get into that round, we talk about the early days, how his upbringing and what he was like as a kid didn't exactly line up with where he is today.
I think if people met me, maybe, I don't know, like 10, 15 years ago, they would see that I'm somebody that was actually pretty bad at communications. I was quite expressionless. People thought I was really robotic, really like stern and stoic. Well, actually, I can't really say people thought. I actually was that way. Let me say that. Like, so I think, which I think obviously now I've gotten a lot better at, and that's a very important part of
I
being an
would agree.
entrepreneur.
I would agree.
And it's just really interesting to look back to see how much I've changed as an individual, and grown to be able to, kind of grow into my responsibilities today as a founder.
Yeah. And so as a kid, though, do you remember the things that you were interested in? So as a unemotional sort of robotic kid, um, were you into entrepreneurship? Did your parents show you the model of oh, this is what I should do? Or, could you have ever predicted as, an elementary school kid that you might go down this path?
I think as an elementary school kid, I thought I was going to get expelled. I was a really bad student.
No
Um,
way.
I'm first generation American, and I actually went to school in China until the first grade. And in that system, I was like considered like the worst student. And I, so looking back, I always joke like, "Hey, I'm to my parents. I'm like, I'm so glad that you gave me this opportunity to be in America because I went to a good school. I grew up and learned so much. I became a founder. But if I was back, in a different system, I don't know. I might have been juvie or something like a totally different life.
Well,
Like,
so I want to take you down another path of questions because there's some stuff that sticks out to me around your background. Before I get there, so tell me a little bit about your parents. Are they entrepreneurs? Are they, they work for the companies? Are they scientists? Like, what's their background?
yeah, so my mother is the best mother in the world. She doesn't. She just took care of us growing up. So she cared a lot for us as a stay-at-home mom. And then my father was a scientist, philosopher, businessman, kind of like a Renaissance man of sorts.
Hmm.
Definitely businessman, but had a lot of technical skill sets as well. And then they together, very early on, actually in the '90s, came to America, and they were looking for better opportunities for us versus being, in China, and then they brought us over as kind of like a pretty early wave of immigrants from China.
Nice. Okay. Well, there's a part of this that sounds very consistent. First generation Chinese American. dad was a scientist, came over to the United States. Like it all kind of lines up. One thing that I'm just very curious about is that you were a college athlete, from what I could gather, which is not typical when it comes to, I would say, Asian American kids in terms of the activities that they are encouraged to do. And so this is part of your profile that I think is slightly unique. I think you played ball in college. Tell me a little bit about that. What role did sports play for you growing up as you started to evolve?
Yeah, Jason, I think you picked up on a really important thread here is that I think on paper, a lot of those things are very consistent with the immigrant Chinese American experience. But growing up, I had none of the expectations or obligations of a typical immigrant kid growing up. I wasn't expected to be a doctor or a lawyer or any of those things. I wasn't expected to. Actually, there was just like no tiger parent type of anything. So I kind of had my choice in choosing what I wanted to do, what I wanted to participate in, and one of those things was sports. So I started playing football in middle school, um, and I it channeled like a warrior spirit, and it channeled like this energy in me where I devoted a lot of that discipline, a lot of energy into discipline, I should say, and developed that. And so sports, I think, played a huge role in making me understand like how hard can you push, like what you think you can do versus what you can actually do. Built up the work ethic that kind of still shapes who I am today.
That's a fascinating background. I'll just tell you, like, I was a VC before, and every VC has, and every investor has certain things that they like. There's a lot of consistencies around certain characteristics that many investors like. There's one I'm not sure how many people align, but I really appreciate people that were in the military and played sports at least the college level. I think both indicate something that you talked about, which is like a real demonstration of investing a lot of time, effort, energy, sacrifice into getting to a goal, and ability to withstand pain, also leadership. So I saw that in your background. I was like, oh, wow, I have not met many Chinese American founders who also played college sports at an elite level. And so I definitely wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about that. Bouncing from there, so I think you were at Princeton. Um, Coming out of Princeton, tell us a little bit more about what you thought the road ahead for you was. Were you kind of standard down the middle? I'm going to do something, be an investment banker, or your other, classmates from Princeton, or did you already have the entrepreneurial bug coming out of undergrad?
I believe this was 2012, and there was this movie called The Social Network. And so, at the time, I watched that movie and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool stuff. And I used to, I used to be a aspiring mathematician, and had a bunch of friends in the math, U.S. Math Olympiad circuit who came to San Francisco and became founders. So actually, when I was after finishing freshman year at Princeton, I actually dropped out for like a couple of years, 2 years, 2.5 years to be exact. And I came to San Francisco and I said, I'm gonna go find other founders to work with and maybe invest a little bit of capital. There must be lots of Mark Zuckerbergs around, and they're all young. They're all like 20 years old, and like I can go find them. So actually, with a couple, one other founder buddy of mine, we started like a micro VC studio of sorts as a sophomore in college, and no, I definitely did not take a very normal path. It took me down a totally different road, and I was like a VC.
Huh. Man, your background gets more and more interesting as we go along. So it doesn't seem like you were going to do anything standard throughout this journey. And so now, like, I want to get into the meat of Aquaria and what we like to talk about at Funded, which is a lot about what goes into the founder's approach and mindset as they're even thinking about the start of their company, let alone the last fundraise that you did. So as you're thinking about this problem, you're thinking about a pretty core problem to all of humanity, which is access to potable water, right? Um, as you're thinking about this, I always liked asking founders, when you started, did you know that this was going to be a venture-backed business, or did you feel like you could do this without raising capital from outside sources? I think I know the answer to this one, given how how intensive um, from a hardware and science point of view this is. But tell me a little bit about even starting this company. It's like, holy shit, I have this idea. Absolutely need to raise money. How did you think about this?
Yeah. Um, so I think the part where was thinking like a VC investor for a while actually played into the way I thought about starting Aquaria.
Mm.
So I've always been a thesis-driven kind of thinker. I always think ahead and before I kind of work backwards towards how I build something. And so when I was thinking about starting Aquaria, what I did was look at kind of first study like what is the problem with water? And so I actually surveyed many different types of emerging water technologies that had the potential to unlock more abundant clean water. So creating water from the air, that's what Aquaria is today, could have been another version like, buildings desalination under the ocean or like, cloud seeding or any number of different novel technologies. Um, but eventually, what I realized was that actually all of these took massive amounts of capital that you had to raise. But there was only one option that had the speed and the kind of scalability of the venture game, which was ultimately what I picked, which is atmospheric water generation.
So from the very start of this, you were like, there's a massive problem that needs to have a company um, as big as it possibly could be, and if you put those things together, you kind of end up at a venture capital backed company.
Correct.
Um,
Yeah.
I I I always talk about the most recent fundraise, but
Mm.
you and I talked once before about the sort of journey of getting your first dollars in and your sort of the second dollars in. I wonder if you could walk us through a little bit of that, just so we know that. By the way, we're going to talk about $112 million round, but I think a lot of times when people see Aquaria raises $112 million, it's like another one of those Ivy League silver spoon kids who just like and dances their way all the way to $112 million raise. I think the early innings of Aquaria, especially from a fundraising point of view, wasn't so much that. Tell me a little bit about some of the sort of twists and turns of that journey.
Well, put it simply, it was incredibly challenging. I mean, this is why I'm so excited to be on, to be able to share back with the community because I can remember less than 2 years ago, I'm on the other side looking at all these videos and, learned a lot from your course, Jason. I mean, it was like try anything and everything you possibly can. I mean, going back into the lore of the founding of Aquaria, one thing that I did was I bootstrapped this business for quite a long time. I put in millions of my dollars that I had made from previous businesses to kick off Aquaria, and of course I like to say that oh yeah I had 100% conviction. That's which is definitely true, but also it was because like venture investors weren't interested in investing in water. Like that had nothing to do with any of the mental models related to SaaS or any number of any like oh cool water like we don't run out of water to San Francisco like cool like what do we do with this?
Yeah.
So it was very very challenging.
Yeah. I think like one of the interesting turning points is kind of when you felt like you broke through. So there was early days when of course you wanted to raise outside capital, but what you were feeling from what you're describing is just like resistance, resistance, resistance. And not many people have one access to their own capital, but also I think it's more important is like even though you did have access to that capital, it's like the risk appetite to say, no, 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 like we have something here and we're just going to keep pushing because eventually the tide will turn or eventually people will understand. Is there something you can point to that, made it feel like, oh, that thing, or maybe this series of events were some of the things that helped turn the tide and allow you to bring in some of your first outside capital?
Yeah. So I think it's a mixture of internal and external influences for sure. I think partially internally is we just kept pushing. We kept pushing on figuring out like, okay, well, we obviously understand that investors want to see a good business. So perhaps that in the early days you can't understand why this is a big opportunity because you also don't see the relevant progress. Okay, so then let's figure out where is there an exciting enough opportunity with water so that it gets investors excited. And then we also have to build the relevant traction related to that. And that sounds very simple, but it wasn't very obvious because as a water company, we literally could have hit anyone. We could have been a bottled water company. We could have been a water cooler company. We could have been, a farming company. Like everybody would hit us up like, "Oh, that's a great idea. We need more water." But then it was like, okay, well, the feedback is yes, I need more water. So then, who is our actual customer? Like, what kind of business are we?
Mm,
So, I think for a solid 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, we were continuously kind of iterating through that so that we can get to a point where investors like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's not just like me and my San Francisco water or lack of water problems, but that's something bigger. And then also, I think externally, um, hurricanes and wildfires and contamination events and droughts and these things that are, you know, just increasing, frequency and severity every year. I think that's when people started waking up that, oh wait, this is like an issue we have in America,
yeah.
not just outside.
I love what Brian is highlighting here. The difference between having a massive problem to solve and actually running a venture backable business. A lot of founders assume that because their idea is very important, that investors will immediately see the opportunity. But without clear traction and the right framing, investors can easily see your idea as being too broad or maybe too niche. Brian spent years refining both his business model and his messaging, making sure investors saw Aquaria as more than just a water company, but as a high-growth, scalable solution to a growing crisis with customers ready to pay. After the break, we'll talk about the moment when things finally started to click. All right, so the problem with fundraising is that it just seems so simple, right? Fundraising is asking people for money. That's the first big problem. The second big problem is that most of the people that are going out to try to fundraise have been trained their whole lives this idea of fake it till you make it. So those two things combined create one of the biggest challenges that I see with startup founders today, which is why I created Adamant Fundraising. It turns out faking it till you make it when it comes to fundraising is a recipe for wasting a ton of time and getting to suboptimal outcomes or just completely failing. And yes, there's a ton of content online that you can find that will give you little bits of what to do. But if you're looking for a way to bring all the best knowledge from somebody that you trust into one place and surround that with a supportive community, live events that will give you great feedback, and other support structures to make sure that you are doing exactly what you need to do to fundraise the right way, well, then I want you to come check out Adamant Fundraising. Adamant Fundraising is our online program and community that has helped hundreds of founders get through the process successfully, has been a part of raising over $400 million, and it's something that we're extremely proud of. So if this sounds like something that could help you out, check out adamantfundraising.com and reach out online, ask any questions. We'd love to consider having you. All right, back to the show. I'm really glad you shared that one simple insight, which maybe sounds overly simple, but I think is something that founders that have stars in their eyes around, building a massive business sometimes glaze over, which is just this idea of like, are we building a good business, right? And we believe that we can build a good business, but have we shown enough? Have we shown enough to make people also believe alongside of us that we're, actually on the verge of or in the middle of building a great business? And I just think like some people kind of put the cart before the horse and start talking to investors and kind of assume that story will get across. And I'll just say it again. It's like, if you're building a software business and it was like, well, okay, they need to see more to like be able to show that we're running a good business. You put your head down, code a little bit more, work with some customers, code a little bit more. Like aside from human capital and your time, you can probably get there on your own. But for you, like you were iterating with your own capital and really just pushing it forward. So that push is super impressive. And then Sometimes, yeah, you can't really predict when the world is going to shift in certain ways or sort of towards your problem space, but certainly a lot of things have been happening, certainly where I live in California, that threaten our water supply. And all of a sudden, stars align. Your business starts actually, having a little bit more tangible proof points to show, and the world is shifting, which leads us to, I think, bringing in your first institutional capital. And now I want to fast forward to essentially right before you go out and raise this latest round. Okay, so talking about raising the latest round, what's been reported is that you raised $112 million for Aquaria, which is amazing. Tell us a little bit about where you were at when you kind of knew that you needed to go raise a round. What was happening in the company? Anything that you can share around, is it a runway driven thing? What was the trigger point that made you go, I think we should go raise now? Things were happening. Were you running out of money? What were the characteristics or situation that you found yourself in when you went out?
Mm, for sure. And this is directly tied to the topic we were just talking about because, essentially for I don't want I want to pin it maybe 2 years, maybe a little bit more, 2.5 years. We were constantly running 3 months, 6 months type of experiments, iterating on like product market fit, figuring out what that thing is. And along the whole time, I was talking to investors the whole entire time to get feedback and try to go through that. It's kind of embarrassing to look back and I can see my email threads. It's like 2021 deck is totally different from 2022 deck, which is totally different from 2023 deck. Um, but then we hit a point where we're like, oh wait, this one is like this is interesting. Where the customer. So actually, I'll touch on the exact moment. Is like I said before, we could have been a water cooler company, a bottled water company, and another number of type of companies. But then one day we had a customer that wanted a machine, one of our largest machines at the time, which can produce enough water to support the entire house. So they said, I want one, maybe multiple of these for my house. And I was like, wow, that's like a 60, 70,000, maybe $100,000 purchase. Why would you want that for your house? And then we kind of came to this unique insight where it was like, oh, actually, there was this killer use case where people would be willing to spend a lot to protect their families in case that their water fails. And there's lots of parts of America where the water supply is not safe and secure, that we take for granted in San Francisco. And so I think that insight came. Then we spent another 3 to 6 months to validate that, like one of our usual product market fit sprints. And that's when we discovered, like, holy crap, this is like that fit we were looking for that is big enough, exciting enough, a killer use case. And also, well, this also is like really big, which means we need money for it. It's like we can't iterate on this anymore, like the past. And that's when we decided, let's go for it.
Amazing. And so walk me through that. Like you're hitting on all the things that I think most founders dream of, founders that haven't even gotten the taste of what even initial shreds of product market fit, are like. And so I think you're looking at your co-founder, who, by the way, I think is your brother. Looking at your co-founder and you're like, we should go. How long from that point till closing did it all take?
Another 15 months.
So, it hasn't been easy, even as we were leading to the exciting point for a lot of founders, which is we have the thing. It's not like people were like amazing, like immediately throwing $100 million in your pocket.
No, not at all. Not at all. It still took another 15 months for us to get to that point. In between which we almost ran out of money twice or 3 times, and we had to plug in with kind of safes in between and roll up investors who started believing in us. And I mean, we were kind of like a cockroach. We just never went away.
Yeah.
Like there are people that have known me working on this for like 5 years, and every 12 months we might have pivoted to a different version of this, and they're like, wow, we're still kind of going at this, and we're just keep going, we just keep going, and but it took another 15 months and almost running out of money another 2 to 3 times, and then we were able to get to the point where we are today.
Man, I just love stories like this because again, I mean, we started here, or I started by saying you look at a headline like Aquaria raises $112 million, and a lot of founders could see that and say, like, I don't even want to hear about this. I don't want to hear this story. This is not applicable to me. But as we pull back the layers, it's so applicable. And I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of some of the products that we've launched at my company and seeing examples all around as you dig deeper and deeper to some of the biggest companies where it's like stuff's like not working, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. But the core understanding that the founder has and what they're working on, it's like it makes sense. Like it's crazy that this wouldn't work. And you find everything that you can to keep pushing. And it's like it's not working in this direction, but it turns out like it's not a full pivot away. It's like 3 degrees this way, and all of a sudden it like unlocks everything. I love hearing stories like that. Um, you said from knowing that you wanted to go raise this round to when you close 15 months. Don't have to say who or how much or anything, but whatever you can share. Do you remember the moment that you realize like it's actually going to happen? Sometimes it's a lead investor calling and saying like, I want to do this, or you receiving a term sheet. Do you remember when like, holy shit, you're like, oh my God, we're going to get this done?
Um, there was no moment like that.
No moment like that.
It just kept going. Our actual closing process took about 3 months, and
Oh, wow.
so basically, from our kind of lead investors coming in, then I basically kind of went back and recycled 5 years worth of investors, like this is happening, and then kept and basically ran an entire process around everything I've done in 5 years. And the whole time I was also like trying to scale up our new product market fit business, and so while running the 3 months process, it was also like, oh yeah, we're better than last month now. Also, this month also better than the last month. And so I think it's like I don't think I ever had that one moment where it was like, yeah, we did it. We got that one lead investor who's going to take down 60% of the round and like, get everything going. No, I wouldn't say we had a moment like that.
Should we, Brian, should we give you that moment right now and at least have a little bit of an ex?
Actually, I
um,
think I'm having that moment, like, like when we first started our call, like I think I'm having that moment now, like
okay.
today, like this week. Not because we raised the capital, because, we raised a mixture of debt and equity, which is like not typical for, I think, a normal software company, the Valley
Right.
per se. So there's strings attached to them. But when I think about like, the moment is here, I actually think it's like right now for us where we are starting to scale our business for real, like really, really go into hyper scaling mode. I'm like, we're here. Like things are really working. And I can see a pathway towards, $100 million in the next 18 to 24 months. And I know how that's going to work. And the repeatable motion is there. Like literally this month, I feel like we're like here.
That's amazing. I love that kind of realization is coming over you over the last, I mean, as it's happening. I like that it's happening here. Um, a lot of times we go in the opposite direction. I'll land on this like nice, good feeling, but I want to balance things out. I want to ask you, over it sounds like 3 years of challenging fundraising. Any particularly difficult times stand out to you? I like interactions with VCs or experiences going through the fundraising process. Anything that like you know hangs in the back of your head, like, oh man, that was horrible.
Uh, yeah, definitely. So, you know, there was moments I remember in particular, and I guess they were kind of like shortly following each other. But um, so I think it was around actually when I joined the program, that was like my first major preparation where I felt that I think we've hit on something really exciting about a product market fit, and thus let me do a full preparation, um, and do a round, whether that's more or less. That's let's get us going. And it was really devastating because we ran a full process and it didn't work.
Hmm.
And so, we ran a full process. I hit up all my contacts and preparation and everything, and we went full force, 100%, and it didn't pan out. Like that was just absolutely devastating. And this was, early 2024. It was early 2024, and I remember in March of 2024, I started like doing, almost like self hypnosis of sorts to make sure that I'm in the top mental shape, even though it was just so absolutely like demoralizing that you ran this whole process and you couldn't get where you needed to be. So I just remember so clear. This is like middle of March of 2024 or something like that, where it was
Yeah.
like,
What was
damn.
your takeaway from that? There's so many things that a founder could think around doing that. Um, were you able to be honest with yourself? Were you defiant? Like, you meant, I obviously I know what goes into a process. It's one of my things. It's a lot. It's like investing a lot of time and effort. And so to come away with that and then to keep going, do you remember what your takeaway from that whole thing was?
I think this is one of those moments where I think my previous experience as a really experienced athlete came into play, where it was like failure is not an option. It's just simply not an option. And I remember at the time, I remembered actually there was a football game in college we played where we won in like 6 or 7 overtimes. It was like the most crazy, like, and you were like roller coaster motion, up and down, up and down, up and down. And it was like, that was kind of like, I thought about that moment back then. I was like, well, failure is not an option. So figure it out, and that's, sounds funny. It was like self hypnosis, but it was like, you just got to keep going. There really isn't another choice. Like, what else are you supposed to do?
That is completely insane. Um, before we wrap out up and kind of asking you a few other questions about where Aquaria is going and maybe some other founders that you're excited about, uh, I want to touch back on something that I hinted at, which is that your co-founder is your brother. How how did investors react to a brother-brother co-founding dynamic? Was it neutral? Did some people have questions about it? Did people think it was positive? And then once you tell me what the investor reaction was, I'd love to hear more about what it's like to work with your brother, from the inside.
Yeah, I think investor receptivity was pretty positive because my brother and I couldn't be more different people. Like we're
Hmm.
just completely different. Um, there's just nothing similar about us, and just having a conversation with each of us, it was like very clear that like, oh, like Brian and Eric, they're brothers, but they're like they might as well be on other planets. So we complement each other very well. And one of our investors, we worked with us on kind of like a um, founder dispute type of
Yeah.
game, not game, like simulation of sorts. We weren't the only founder group. There were like a couple of founder groups, and the investor worked with us, like, okay, all right, you guys should talk among yourselves, like what happened if your company breaks apart, right? Many times in the early stages because of founder breakups. And so it's like, all right, take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and like discuss. So me and Eric, we literally, nah, we're good. Like we just like we don't have anything to discuss. We kind of just hung out there for like a couple of minutes, and it was like, in that moment, I remember forever. It's like, yep, no, we're good, we're good.
Yeah, I didn't know. I was also digging around. I think your brother was also an athlete, college athlete or something.
Yeah, he was previously a junior Olympian for the hammer throw.
Jesus. I was gonna say, yeah, I thought maybe in that simulation you're like, well, I think we would just wrestle to figure out who comes out on top.
That's a good
Awesome.
one. Yeah, yeah, we could do that. We both used to wrestle as well. Yeah.
Last question I'd like to ask. Sometimes we find that people, as they get deeper and deeper into being a startup founder, they tend to be around more and more founders themselves, like other founders. Are there any founders, especially in the sustainability space and maybe tangential spaces to you, that you've been following that are in your ecosystems that we should be aware of, and any cool projects that you've heard of?
Sure. Um, So I'm going to be a little biased here, but I think I alluded a little earlier, but I'm really excited about all of the really good founders that are working on highly technical water solutions these days.
Hmm.
Water doesn't get a lot of love at all from like any kind of investor. It's like too boring or whatever for venture investors, and it's too slow and low yield for more of your traditional private equity guys frequently. So it's like water gets no love from anybody except for the government, and even then it's kind of like the one left out. So you know there's a company called Flotion that I recently came across. I've been studying them a lot. Big fan. They're the ones actually building the subsea desalination. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like 500 meters under the sea, and get rid of all of its problems with desalination with less energy use.
Wow.
Amazing. Like unlocking more water supply and none of the problems or lesser of the problems of desalination. Super cool. Um, there's another founder. I believe his name's Augustus Dorico. He's working on cloud seeding. Another
I know
really cool
Augustus,
dude.
he's in Southern California.
Yeah, I don't know him personally, but I came across a lot of what he's working on. I think that's really cool on cloud seeding. Um, um, and then there's a company out of the Netherlands that are doing. They're basically pointing a series of mirrors, concentrating solar power, and then boiling the ocean, literally. And
For
this so
desalination.
for desalination. Yeah. So there's a couple of companies and founders that I've been following that are in different parts of the world working on bringing more water to us that I'm really excited for the work they're doing.
Love it. Well, Brian, it's been really fun to follow you and see everything that you're doing. It's a really important problem. I don't actually know why more civilians aren't freaked out about this, and why more investors aren't putting time and effort and obviously capital into this space. But I'm in Southern California. Maybe I'm in the minority that is like acutely aware of this. But we're proud of everything you've done, and we're excited to see everything you do from here on out.
Thanks for having me, Jason, and hopefully this was the helpful session. And I'm really glad to be part of the community. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. That was Brian Sheng, founder and CEO of Aquaria, a company working to solve one of the world's biggest problems: access to clean water. His story is a reminder that even the best ideas don't always resonate with investors right away. It took years of bootstrapping, multiple near-death experiences, and relentless iteration before he finally broke through. But he got there, and after countless pivots and conversations, Aquaria closed a $112 million round to scale its technology. When we come back, we'll hear my producer Paige's thoughts on our conversation. There are a ton of easy-to-make mistakes when growing a startup. I feel like I've either made them all myself or seen them all as an advisor and investor. One super common one is waiting too long to bring in expert help around managing company finances. I get why that happens, though. You're not a tiny company anymore, but you feel like you're not big enough to have an in-house finance team and don't want to waste money. My advice to you is to avoid the mistake of just winging it. This is not a time to fake it till you make it. At least talk to someone early so that you can hear about how the additional help could actually save you money and improve your operations. If you're looking for recommendations on who to talk to, check out Propeller Industries. They've worked with hundreds of venture to growth stage startups, so have a ton of deep knowledge to help you avoid major bumps and set your company up for success, whether it's talking to investors or planning for future growth. Set up a free call by going to fundedpod.com/propeller. That's PROPELLER, and tell them we sent you. They're giving Funded listeners a one-time $2,500 new client credit if you work with them for 3 months. Hey, Paige.
How you doing, Jason? Do you want
Are
to
we
share a
role-playing this
secret?
now? Okay, yes, we had technical difficulties, but I thought our intro conversation was worth repeating. So I'm
It
going to
was.
ask you again.
Mhm.
How's it going with South by where you are? I meant being in Austin for the first time for South by. That's an experience.
Yeah, well, like I said, like it's crazy here. I am in a very busy area, Auditorium Shores, for those who are aware of Austin, right next to Terry Black, like you also mentioned. So my streets closed down again, and things are complex and whatever. But it's so cool to be like living here in this time because I have access to so many different types of events. so many different types of people. I was at Capital Factory this morning, hearing from some industry experts in the venture industry. So yeah, there's a lot of life here going on
Yeah.
right now, and I enjoy it.
Tons of founders coming into the city, tons of investors, people that we know in our community. It's cool to be able to have the excuse to see people face to face. Like tons will be in town for sure.
Yeah, I know. I'm just buckling down. I'm gonna recharge, because even though I am extroverted in my nature, I really am an introvert at heart. So I'm gonna do probably nothing tonight and recharge for this weekend of events.
Make a ton of sense. And my transition was like talking about Austin. Speaking of Austin, our guest is in Austin.
I don't know if he's currently in Austin. I should probably ask him, but I think he is. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of opportunity here for what he's doing, right?
Right.
Because Austin,
Water is top of
water
mind.
is tougher to come by here. Like it's so weird moving from the Northeast, where water is so plentiful by the Great Lakes, and here there's like scheduled days where you can use water, right? Like for
Yeah.
sprinkler systems. I've never lived somewhere like that, so definitely gonna be cool to see how his technology changes that, because
Yeah.
literally pulling it from the air. So
Yeah. And the whole journey was actually pretty crazy to hear. So what'd you think? What were your
yeah,
big takeaways?
yeah. Let's talk about it. So my favorite part of this episode was how much focus he put on finding product market fit, finding your target customer, because I do genuinely think when you're raising an earlier round, even though I don't know what you would classify this round as, but in general, when you're raising an earlier round, it's so important to tie it in to, a specific like problem being solved, a specific customer, being able to niche down in order to, be able to explain how you're going to build traction, or how you've built traction thus far around this very specific problem being solved, and being able to play that into a story that leads to the next milestone, etc. So he had kind of shared about how they struggled to raise at first for a while. And
Yeah.
then
The thing that I see and like that you're picking up on is a lot of founders are like, oh, it took me so long to raise capital. The fundraising process takes a really long time. But a lot of times when the story is that, and that was part of Brian's story, which is like, gosh, it just took so long. We were raising forever.
yeah.
I actually think a lot of that is many times founders will start fundraising before they've locked in who their ICP is, or exactly what product market fit is going to look like. And so what ends up happening is they start these conversations, and investors are professional investors for a reason. They pick up on these things. They're not
Mhm.
quite sure if there's like a great fit or if they found the thing. But along the way, the good founders out there just focus on their business, keep iterating, trying to find the things that work. And then along the way, when it starts hitting, they've already started conversations with investors, they've developed relationships. And so when that progress starts coming up and they're able to share that, it actually then kicks off the part of the fundraise where it starts working. And so, yeah, I just think timing can be a thing, and in making sure that the business is doing what it's supposed to do is maybe one of the more important lessons from this. Um,
Yeah. I
fundraising.
think this was a topic that we started talking about recently too, about raising during inflection points of the business. So like even being able to for them to say, we've decided this is exactly what we're building for. And for them it was targeting homes and homeowners that want their own water system, which is their technology, and saying this is specifically what we're doing. This is what the need has been proven through this. This is the traction we currently have. It makes it so much easier for the investor to see the big picture, but I see how a lot of early stage founders, it's scary to get so specific and niche, because then you feel like they're not going to see the big vision, because we could become so much more. But I
Yeah,
feel like when you pick something specific, naturally they'll understand there's always going to be more that can be built from it, and you can hint at that, but it's
yeah.
hard for them to grasp how the company's gonna grow and build if they don't have like a specific starting point.
I also like that you pointed out that as a possible inflection point, which is like deciding on a niche. And one of the things that I'll call out is Investors know that in early stage companies, a lot of the work is just learning. A lot of the work is cutting off paths that didn't work and saying like, oh, this actually isn't it. And we figured out this isn't it. And we learned all these things. And so for Brian to say like, we have these systems for homes that pull water out of the air, provide, water for homes based on the available water in the ecosystem. And to be able to say, we tried a bunch of things, and this is the thing that we uncovered from our last experiment, which caused us to double down on this, which is how we got our first customers. To be able to communicate that to an investor shows that a lot of work in fact finding and data gathering has already happened. And in an investor's head, it's like, oh, I don't have to pay for that lesson. I don't have to invest now and waste, have the founder spend money and effort to figure out those lessons. They've already learned those lessons. I get a chance to come in after and reap the benefits of everything that happened before me. So
Yeah.
absolutely that can be an inflection point.
Yeah. I really I feel like the market, I'm newer to the space still, even 2 years in. Like, I understand that it's gone through so many changes, and times were different before, and I feel like there was this area during COVID maybe, or a little bit earlier, where that wasn't even a necessary inflection point at times. Like, they were more willing to throw money and be like, "Figure out your target customer." Like, you have this technology, or you have this thing that you're building. Like, they were more lenient, it seemed like, with founders having that time period of figuring out how specific they wanna get and what that niche is. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that, like?
You're spot on. Spot on. When in the ZERP era and COVID, when money was flowing, flowing crazily, um, investors were just actually looking for more opportunities to deploy capital, and so they were
Mhm.
getting super aggressive in terms of, well, when do we want to take a bet? Like, when do we want to actually give founders capital? And a lot of the time, it's just like, this is kind of interesting. The kind of an interesting founder will pay will pay up to learn alongside the founder and let them experiment alongside of our dollars. Certainly now, and certainly as Brian was raising, it's just not the same. It's not
Yeah.
the same at all. And having enough evidence that on the early days that you validated the problem, that you understand the customer, you know that they're willing to pay, all those things have become much more important, and were very important for Brian to have before he raised this monster round.
Yeah. And he cracked the code, he spent the time doing exactly that, and was able to pull together a really awesome round, which still, and this is my other favorite part about the episode, and you guys touched on this, you see a hundred plus $1 million round, like, wow, that just must have been some big raise. Everyone piled in. It happened fast, and it's just huge and amazing. But this took years in the making, and he just never stopped. Like
Yeah.
he said, I think he said, I was just like a cockroach. I wouldn't go away. Like there was so many opportunities where people probably were like, "You're crazy. Like you're
Yeah.
crazy. Let it go." And he was just like, "No, I'm not going to," because he believed in what he was doing. So I feel like that's also such a nice flag, like green flag for investors. I guess some could view it differently, but for the right investors, they're like, "Wow, he's not gonna stop. He's not gonna stop."
Yeah, I think that's a good segue into maybe one last thing to bring up, which I don't think it's come up on any of our previous episodes, but I had the opportunity to ask him about um, growing up around sports and being an elite athlete. He played college football at Princeton. His co-founder and brother was a college athlete in track and field, and a lot of a lot of the grit that he demonstrated in getting to this round, getting his company to this stage after all the challenges, I think maybe could have been predicted just by the fact that he has done some really hard stuff in order to become a college level athlete, a Division I athlete. I personally, as an investor, and I said this in the episode, I really love backgrounds like college athletes, military, because I know that they've gone through a lot of really hard training, and they've been able to look beyond months and months, if not years and years of really hard work in order to get to a goal. And they're able to chew glass with the best of them. So it was cool to hear that. I also love the fact that he's like an Asian dude who I would say most Asian kids growing up in the States don't get the opportunity to devote so much time and effort into athletics. And so hearing him and his journey to go through that and then become a very successful venture-backed founder was some of my favorite parts of the conversation for sure.
Oh yeah, it was badass. And I have one more like quick question that I wanted to ask and touch on because it's something I don't fully understand. So I just wanted a quick take of yours.
Yeah.
So this was like, as mentioned in the episode, a mixture of debt and equity. I know about venture debt now, I believe. For the most part, I understand what it is. Debt, when he says debt and equity, is equity what's classified as like a regular round? Like what?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Regular is a subjective term.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on, who we're talking to. If we're talking to debt investors, then maybe a regular round is
Yeah.
a round. But I would say when people talk about raising capital, especially in our worlds and in the media cycles for us, they are talking about raising equity.
Okay.
And just I think the things for you to understand in terms of differences is when you're investing in equity or you're raising equity, you're selling ownership in the company. So people own the
Yes.
equity. Debt is giving people money and expecting to be paid back with interest. I think that's like the simplest way to think about it. The other differences to consider are a lot of times when you raise debt is collateralized or given a backstop. I'm trying to simplify it based on a couple of things. It could be you are making enough revenue where you can raise against that, and debt investors will say like, oh, there is some sort of value here that we don't have to guess is coming through. We'll lend you money because we know that you're making cash every month.
Mhm.
It can also be based on assets. So for instance, when you're a hardware company, you could raise debt capital and collateralize it with the hardware that you're buying or building.
Okay.
When we say collateralize, it means that debt investors if you don't pay back your money, a debt investor needs to be able to grab something and take it back for themselves to get
Yeah.
paid back. So if there's hardware and you don't pay them back, they can go, well, all that hardware is ours now, and now we're going to go liquidate it and make the money that we need to make. And so I don't know exactly what it was with Brian, but with Brian, because there was a lot of hardware and stuff, I assume some of that is raising money against the hardware that he needs to buy. But a lot of times each company will then mix raising equity with debt.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. My last question that came up while you were saying that is, so an early stage founder, for the most part, you're not really going to get venture debt like off the bat because you don't have as much.
So you can't raise debt. I mean, it would be very hard for a very early stage founder to just
Yeah.
raise debt on its own.
Okay.
Now, venture debt is something different where it's often it's collateralized by I might be actually mixing this up just a little bit, but venture debt is a little bit different in that these debt providers are loaning you capital, but mostly will only do it alongside venture capital equity investors because they believe that a venture investor putting in money de-risks their investment a little bit.
That's fair.
And then they collateralize it a little bit by saying, if things don't work out a certain way, we're going to take equity in the company. We're going to take control of the company. So it's a way of adding on a little bit of capital alongside equity. And a lot of people consider debt to be less. I don't know why this is blinging. A lot of times
so popular.
talk about debt as being less expensive than equity, because if you own a percentage of the company and the company becomes massively big, well, then the equity investment, it pays out, and you're essentially giving them millions and millions of dollars, whereas debt is capped. that you have a specific payback that you owe people.
It seems like it'd be a nice move down the line so that if you didn't want to give away more ownership, like that's a nice option. Well, you're nodding like I'm saying something right. It's making me
No,
feel
no,
awesome.
it's very right. I think, nothing, there's no free lunch
Yeah.
in
True.
finance. And so, yes, that is nice that you don't get to, you get to not give away as much equity of your company.
Hmm.
But debt covenants, basically payback periods and the interest that you have to pay back can put a big strain on a company.
Yeah.
Um, and if your company isn't growing in the right way and all of a sudden you have to service this debt, as in pay back money that you can't afford to pay back at that moment, it can cripple a company. It can actually put companies out of business. So
Pick your battle, right?
pick that, pick
Sure,
your
pick
battles
your
and
battle. But let's end this on a positive note because there's so many ways that things could go, but I just think it's incredible, like the amount of effort that Brian and Eric, his co-founder and brother, have been able to put into this, like building the product. Like this is huge. Like this is stuff that we haven't seen yet in the world, which is most of, startups that are on the rise. But specifically this, I just feel like it's a company that we have not seen something like this before ever, where like water is being pulled out of the air and the thought of having that attached to all these different homes, like especially in places like Arizona or Austin or in Texas. It's just so cool to be able to hear about this company raising this massive round and being able to
So
see what they do with it. So I'm very
honestly, like, it's talking to founders like Brian and hearing about his, projects like this that make what we do so fun. Like
so fun.
actually creating the future, changing the way humans are going to live. Yeah, coolest part of the job for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, cheers to Aquaria. I think that's the debrief.
I think that's it. If you're looking for more insights, strategies, and support around fundraising, subscribe to our newsletter. It's at fundedpod.com/newsletter. And find me on social. I'm at Jayeh, that's JAYYEH, on almost every platform. I respond to DMs and newsletter replies, so hit me up. This episode was produced by Paige Randall.
Hey, guys.
Thanks also to John O'Lee from Adamant.
Hey, everyone.
And as always, one last thanks to our sponsor, Vanta, the leading automated security and compliance platform.